think during the pandemic, we've really all learned to focus on caring for one another. It was very much brought to the fore. And we got a reminder about how much work and the workplace relies on care work that's actually often unseen and often performed by women. And people talk about flexible work and remote work and hybrid work as something that's very helpful for working women. But I wonder, is that really how it's turned out? And you will have seen in the news this morning that we're due a referendum on the constitutional clause about a woman's place in the home. But if you take a look at the hashtag #StayAtHomeGirlfriend, you'll find a whole stream of videos of girls keeping house and filling their days, or at least their videos, with yoga, some smoothies, maybe a walk in the park edited with some light housework and meal prep, presumably for the gone-to-work boyfriend. The Stay-at-Home Girlfriend has clocked up over 200 million views and counting. And it all looks quite lovely, but at my age I can't help but wonder, is it normalising financial dependency for a whole new generation of women? And are we at risk of creating a new version of a woman's places in the home? The blurred lines between home and work transform things, but they create opportunity as well as complexity. So what can leaders and organisations who are here today do to address this? So to introduce our next panel, I'm delighted to welcome on stage Accenture's own Jess Majekodunmi.
Okay, I will get you to welcome and happy International Day to you all. And I am so delighted that joining me on stage today to talk about this topic is Sinead Gibney, the Chief Commissioner of Human Rights and Equality in Ireland, Executive Coach Ian Slattery, Editor and Journalist Jennifer McShane, and Daire, Keogh, who's the President of Dublin City University. You are all very welcome here today. And when I'm thinking about this topic, and it's very simplest, we all thrive when someone cares about our needs, whether that is in work or at home. Yet there are all these gendered stereotypes and assumptions about who can play that caring role, who takes on those caring responsibilities, and how we value that work. It's really hard to get at exactly what are those assumptions and those stereotypes when, as Michelle said, this work is unseen. It takes place behind closed doors. What are the stories that we're not hearing? And so to explore that today, we have this panel here. But first, I just want to kind of establish, what does care have to do with gender equality? So, Sinead, why do you see the issue of care, and particularly informal, unpaid care, as actually being this foundation for addressing gender inequality?
Thanks, Jess. Well, we simply cannot address and close the equality gap between women and men without tackling the structural role of care. How we as a society value care, our attitudes towards care, and the very gendered way in which we think about care, all of those things contribute to the persistent gender inequality that we have in society. So if we think about it from our early years, girls are assumed to be more natural carers, and it's expected that they will take on more care roles throughout the course of their lives. And this shapes how we're raised, and it also shapes our worldview. And I think it's really important to say that even though you might consider yourself a feminist with a progressive worldview and an appreciation of gender equality, that doesn't make you immune from these societal norms. We all carry them, we're all a product of them. And I think that's a really important point to make at this time of year when we're having discussions about gender equality, because although things are changing, we do still live in a patriarchal, gender-ordered world, and we can't ignore that fact or gloss over it when we're having these discussions. So I think then, moving into our adult lives, the reality is women simply do more unpaid care work in the home than men do. Twice as much housework and 50% more childcare, for example, in households where both are working outside of the home as well. And I know that many of you in the audience will probably think, oh, well, things are changing and men are doing more. And that is absolutely true, and it's to be celebrated. But we're nowhere near yet where we need to be. And I think when we come to making those decisions about care in our lives, women are just simply constrained by these structures in our society and by these expectations. And what that means is that women end up less economically secure, less economically independent. They struggle to advance in the workplace in the same way that men do. We are paid less and we have less secure jobs. And we don't find ourselves in those decision-making positions of power as easily as men do or in the same numbers. And those issues persist outside of childcare as well. So we take on all sorts of care roles throughout the course of our lives, disproportionately to men, with our immediate family, our extended family, and indeed even into our community. And they also persist throughout our lives. So the fact that we get paid less than men means it has a cumulative effect when we come to pension age, with older women much more likely to live in poverty. So looking to the future, and the future that you are all going to build, for us in IREC, that has state-funded, affordable childcare so that women can remain in or return to work as they wish after having children. It means paid parental leave so that families can share responsibilities of family caring as they wish. It has gender equality boards, gender equality politics. We hear women's voices on the airwaves as often as we hear men. It has workplaces that value collective bargaining as a really critical tool to close that gender pay gap. And it has care that is valued, supported, and when it's paid, it's well paid. Because I think the thing is that throughout our lives, we will all care for somebody, and most likely we will all be cared for as well. So besides addressing the gender inequality issue, it's just really high time we had an important conversation about care and an honest conversation about care.
Thank you, Sinead, and for laying down that foundational basis for this. I want to go back to something you said about this idea of like women as natural carers. So yes, women spend twice as much time on caring responsibilities. I also saw that women are 5 times more likely to leave work to take on caring responsibilities. And this idea, this stereotype that men are not natural carers keeps coming up again and again in these discussions. So Ian, I'm going to turn to you on this one. I mean, as a parent of a teenager who was severely ill, did you grapple with this idea of asking for time away from work to take leave in order to take on more caring responsibilities? I'm really curious about that, how you did that, and perhaps you can just share a little bit about your situation that you and your family face.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. So a little bit about the story or the background situation was that we have 3 daughters, Lynn and myself, and our eldest, Mary Kate, developed anorexia when she was really young, 10 years of age. And we, for a couple of years, got lost in the system of where do you go for care, how do you deal with this, in and out of hospital, 1 inch forward, 3 miles back. And it got to a point where clearly you're trying to manage hospital, you're trying to manage home situation, and you're trying to manage work. And for me, it shouldn't have been a difficult conversation. And I probably over-engineered the whole thing in my head and made it much more difficult than it needed to be. One, unlike an awful lot of parents that I meet, I had the economic means to take time out. Like it was my decision if I wanted to create space for myself. That's not typical. Most people are really under the cosh trying to deal with caring and keep the show on the road. And secondly, I was fortunate, I was a managing director in Accenture. Hilary mentioned earlier the whole, the women's network and the change in culture and tone. So when I went to have the conversation with fellow partners, and in particular, country managing director, it was an open door. And they, without exception, said, you need to go and focus on the priority here. And yet, why was it so difficult for me to have that conversation? And in my head, I was going, well, I need to do this, and I need to cover that. And if I came back in 3 months, I could do this, and plan A, plan B, plan C. And the relief of somebody saying to you, for God's sakes, you just get out of your own way here. We will cover for you. And people didn't just say kind things, they stepped up. Fellow partners covered for me. And that was profound in terms of freeing me up to be able to go and care. But my reflections on the care is, to this day, Mary Kate speaks at schools about, thankfully she's really well, has put all that behind us. But when she speaks to groups, without prompting, they go, but your dad took time out of work. He was out for a year and a half. That's fantastic. And it is fantastic. Thank you all very much. But like, you know, as Lynn says, but yeah, the mother was there as well, you know. And somewhere she said, sure, what else would I be doing except keeping the whole show on the road? But people comment on the fact that I took the time out. And the second thing that I think is worth reflecting on is when I meet fathers in similar situations, they have this sort of guilt or feeling of, I've let the side down, I need to fix this, I need to fix this. And when you're dealing with mental illness, it's probably the worst possible thing. And it took me years to learn, will you stop trying to fix it? You know, it was probably going along with my little plan. Yeah. You need to actually, you know, listen. And we spent years then, listen, reflect, talk. So really fortunate to be in that situation. But there's a whole takeaway there around the way people behave when they're under pressure, and actually, instead of fixing it, just listen, try and talk it through.
So, number one stereotype, men can be natural carers. I think we all knew that in ourselves, but I'm not stopping yet. There are more stereotypes to us, and maybe I'll go to you, Daire, for this one as well. Yeah. We mentioned this idea of the gender pay gap. Obviously an issue that's been covered many times on International Women's Day, and that's also another reason that people use it. Oh, men earn more money than women, and therefore they stay in the workforce. But actually studies show that doesn't fully explain it all. There's more going on. Is it unfair to say that then perhaps men are just reluctant carers?
I was joking with John O'Halloran, the president of Cork, that he got the easy question. His was about kind of saving the planet and biodiversity.
Yeah. Sorry, Daire. Sorry, not sorry.
And I'm not been facetious about that, because obviously saving the planet has to be a priority. But I think the inequality that we talk about even goes back way before we were even aware of the planet being in crisis. Even if you look at some of the myths or legends, if you look at the Garden of Eden, you get Adam first of all, and then it was not good for man to be alone. So from his rib, Eve was fashioned. And there's almost the assumption there that Eve is a kind of a carer, or Eve is the support act. And I think that all of us grow up in that. As educators, and Michelle spoke at the outset, the horrible figures about Afghanistan, about sub-Saharan Africa and so on. The education of women is one of the biggest human rights issues in the world today. And I think us as educators, half our students at DCU are women. If we strive to support our students to be the very best version of themselves, but then if there's a footnote, then we'll say, well, that's only for the lads, the girls, that you have a supporting role in this. We've shortchanged them. So the real challenge, I think, for us as educators is to develop society in a way that accepts equality as an intrinsic good. And there's no point, I mean, I think to Jess's point, there's no point in saying, well, that's what the world should be like if the university isn't like that ourselves. And that is the real challenge. How do we change the way we look at care? And Ian's story is one that so many of us can relate to. But the other side of the coin, I think, is true, that for most people, that caring is not about a crisis. You know, we use deficit language when we talk about care. Oh, I had to step back to care for my aged mother. I had to step back to care for a sibling with special needs. But for most of us, care is just part of life. It's as natural as the teenage years. All of us go through it. So I think we need to move away from that deficit language. And rather than talking about care as if it's response to a crisis, it's support. So if we want to build, as we say in DCU, to transform lives and societies, to rebuild the world as it could be and as it should be, I think in that context, caring is a team sport. Yeah. And if we could instill those values, now that's the big challenge. I mean, I'm avoiding your question.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But okay, so what do you do? So it's.
Well, I'll tell you what. Backstage, you said to me, "I am probably the stereotype here."
Oh, I am.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I saw a study done last year in Ireland. It was in the journal. No typos in this piece. But what was it? I need to get it. Only 1 in 5 people in Ireland, only 1 in 5, think that women are equally treated in the home. And in terms of the stereotype, I am the stereotype. I'd say if you ask the 5 people that I live with at home, are women fairly treated? I would say the answer is no. So I put my hand up and be honest. But I try to improve. And I think
This
that's
is
why
part of
today
your
is
journey.
important to
Yes.
shake us out of any kind of complacency, to shake us out of our, and to make us aware that this is a massive issue.
It is. And as Sinead said at the start, probably at every stage, at some point in our lives, we will both be carers and also cared for. So this isn't just a conversation about those who are taking on caring responsibilities. It's more holistic than that. And I want to turn to you, Jen, with that in mind. So you are a widely published journalist and editor. You're currently working as a editorial content producer at the Tate in London, which means I know you are working in a sector where people with disabilities are so underrepresented. So I'm going to ask you a very broad question here. Tell us about an assumption that people often hold about you.
I was just going to say, if I was doing it for the state, I think my job would be much harder. I think for me personally, and I've had cerebral palsy. That's what I have. I've had it since birth, and I think when it comes to care, one of the stereotypes that I've noticed, and it's nearly subconscious, is that perhaps those with disabilities don't necessarily want to strive for independence, in that you still might absolutely need care, but you also still want to have an independent life, and that those two things, certainly for me, they need to coexist side by side. So in order for me to live an independent life, I need care, and that means I need care in the workplace. So I need to know that Tate are not only aware of the needs that I would have as someone with a physical disability, but that they also have the means to be able to deal with those, and they have the language and the knowledge. And then it also means from a personal perspective. So, whether it's government assistance, whether it's having something like infrastructure like accessible public transport, or a system where you get support if you need to spend a lot on taxis. So anything like that, anything practical. So all of that starts as early as possible. I always say we normalize what we see. And that kind of care, and the fact that you may want to live independently, in order to do that, for many people with disabilities, certainly for me, it isn't possible without care. There's no way I could say, I want to live in London and I want to live by myself, and that's just it. There's no way. I need a housekeeper. I need, hairdressers to do my hair. It's called the disability tax. So all the invisible disability tax. So all the added extra costs that you might need as someone who needs care to just live the same life as someone without those needs. So if you need all those elements, the question is, how do you access those elements, and where does that conversation start? And it starts at every level. It starts with education, first and foremost, as young as possible. So whether that means that more disabled people are integrated in mainstream schools, not a lot are. Certainly when I was young, I was the anomaly. I didn't see a lot of other disabled people integrated in schools. And that starts there, because we talk about what we see with our families when we're young, we're impressionable, we're learning about stereotypes, and they're becoming ingrained in us at that age. And then it starts much broader. It starts at government level. It starts with policy. It starts with governments actually not making those care needs an addition, that you're making it an active part of policy, whether it means something like an overhaul of the benefit system, where not all our disability allowance is means tested. The fact that when COVID hit, the government declared that $350 a week was the bare minimum that people needed to get by, but yet disability benefits remain at almost 100 quid less a week, at $250, and that hasn't changed. And that has to start somewhere. It has to start with government bodies, and that all trickles down. into challenging those stereotypes. And it isn't easy. Like, I don't know if I'll see those changes in my lifetime, but I hope to see it for the next. So it's, you know,
I hope so too.
absolutely it's possible to have care and live an independent life, but essential to that care is the structure around you. And that's what we need to talk about more. And, you know, it starts at work as well. As, you know, I primarily chose the Tate job because it said before I applied, we know this is a sector that is underrepresented. We want you to tell us about your disability, and we encourage you to say that on the application. Tell us your needs now, start from the very, very beginning. And it keeps on going. I'm a co-chair of the company's disability network, so just getting in the door, it isn't only the thing that happens, which can often be what a challenge people, you know, face when they get in.
And I know in the workplace, like flexible work has been a great thing for you, and you've advocated for that for, you know, before COVID. And
Yes.
I think, you know, since the outbreak of COVID-19, a lot more organizations are opening up to flexible work. And yet since the outbreak of COVID-19, we've also seen stats that 85% of women say that their caring responsibilities have increased. So flexible work alone isn't a silver bullet. We have things like carers leave, parental leave, and we know that they're not silver bullets either, because still many men don't take up those options. So maybe this is to Ian and Daire to maybe just, why do you think that is, and what might encourage men to take up more caring responsibilities? Ian?
I think there's probably two areas. One is that there's the obvious cultural stereotype around roles for men, roles for women. I think those things can be broken down. You know, once you have awareness of it, and what we've talked about here in terms of role models, and visible response, right? But why do men not take up more roles? There's the culture, but there's also the structural issues. And we talked about the economics, the nuts and bolts of being able to do the roles that you should be able to do.
So the culture, the infrastructure, and also the encouragement to do so.
Yeah, I think very briefly, back to that deficit language, that very often we talk about caring in deficit terms. So organisations make accommodations for carers, and that filters down, that people feel, I need to be accommodated because of my needs. Well, I think if we flip that, and if you put kind of caring in terms of an invitation, where people are actually encouraged to take the lead, where people are encouraged to care. So I think it's really what we need is a rather than an accommodation, an invitation to care for each other.
I love that language, accommodation, not invitation. Now, before we leave the stage, and there are lights being flashed in my eyes, I have to just acknowledge that there was a really big announcement this morning, because this idea of gender and care isn't just in our culture, it's also codified in our constitution. Can you very quickly just tell us what was that announcement this morning, and why perhaps we should be quite excited about it?
So this morning it was announced that we will be having a referendum this year on Article 41.2, and if I have time, I'd love to just read out the words if I could, because in our constitution, Bunrock na hÉireann, it says that in particular, the state recognises that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved, and the state shall therefore endeavour to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. I mean, it is legal language for a woman's place is in the home, and it is archaic, it is sexist, it is offensive, and we must get rid of it. So delighted
So
to see
November, that's going to take place in November.
November, yeah.
Great. Thank you all very much for listening to this. Sinead, Ian, Jennifer and Daire, thank you so much for having this important topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.